Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting about the war in Ukraine. In today's podcast, week 64 of war in Ukraine, and this is the third week of 2023. In today's podcast, Russia keeps on bombing the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. We've had 10 attacks in the last 2 weeks. And we'll speak about the updates from the Bakhmut. The bloodiest battle on earth continues. Russia carried out a massive attack on Ukraine. Kiev was attacked twice in one night. Russian forces conducted another series of drone and missile strikes across Ukraine on the night of May 18th and 19th. Ukrainian military sources reported that Russia launched 6 caliber cruise missiles and 22 Shahed 131 and Shahed 136 drones at Ukraine from the direction of the Black Sea. The Ukrainian General Staff noted that Ukrainian air defenses shot down 16 drones and 3 caliber missiles, despite the Russian Ministry of Defense claim that Russian forces struck all the intended targets. The Dnipropetrovsk region had Serhiy Lysak reported explosion near Kryvyi Rih following Russian strikes in the area. Ukrainian main intelligence directorate GUR representative noted that the recent uptick of Russian drone and missile strikes, as well as artillery strikes along the entire front line, are meant to disrupt Ukraine's counteroffensive plans and preparations. ICW previously assessed on May 14th that the recent increase in Russian strikes on Ukrainian rare areas is likely part of the new air campaign premised on degrading Ukrainian counteroffensive capabilities in the near term. Skibitsky additionally noted that Russia can only produce 25 caliber cruise missiles, 35 Kh-10 101s, 2 Kinjals, and 5 ballistic missiles Iskanders per month. So, considering that Russian forces have launched missile strikes at rare areas of Ukraine on near daily basis thus far in May, it's likely that they are rapidly expanding their stocks of precision munitions, potentially at a rate that exceeds production capabilities. The counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine near Bakhmut continues. Despite all the bombings, despite the Russians shelling the capital of Ukraine and other cities. Russian telegram channels called the offensive unannounced. They said that in reality, the situation is quite difficult for them because they said that Ukrainians started the offensive campaign, but Ukrainian officials say we didn't even start it. That you probably know that in the vicinity of Bakhmut recently, the Russian army was advancing, while the Ukrainian army was defending and retreating. And all these territories, which the Russians managed to occupy in the last 8 9 months, there are particularly no fortifications left. Rather, there are some fortifications, but they are small. There are not so many of them. And now, it turns out that it's easier for the Ukrainian armed forces to advance and to kill Russian forces in these territories where there is no fortifications whatsoever. In the south of Zaporizhia region, where 20 rows of fortifications are lined up, Russian troops just sitting there and they do everything to repel our offensive. They want to fight there. They're comfortable there. They have prepared by fighting near Bakhmut, where they do not have such fortifications, is uncomfortable for them. They are not ready over there. They would like to capture Bakhmut and for everything to stop there and for Ukraine to go offensive there in the south. Well, for the Ukrainians, of course, This is this is not favorable, and that is why the Ukrainian army is now advancing near Bakhmut, where the Russians have nothing ready to repel our attacks. More precisely, they are ready, but they are much worse than in the south. Russians cannot afford to lose Bakhmut for many reasons, because because Russian television and the Russian media needs positive, good news from the front lines. For the Russian experts, Bakhmut has become almost a battle for Stalingrad, the Stalingrad during the Second World War II. This is something that in this case they cannot lose, they can only win. And this is important for Putin and important for his people. For now, in order to stop the advance of the Ukrainian army, the Russians are sending more and more reserves to Bakhmut, and they are also actually withdrawing some of the reserves from the south, from the Parisia region, from the south of Donetsk region, from the north of Lugansk region. That is, from all those areas where quite recently they were going to fully arm to meet the Ukrainian army, they actually concentrating their forces in Bakhmut. They understand if they continue to sit there in their trenches, the Ukrainians will break through in Bakhmut and regain control over the city. This is absolutely unacceptable for Russia. Russia is ready to sacrifice 1 million people to keep the city. So that is why such an interesting situation is happening now. The Ukrainian army is advancing slowly, not really quickly. Every day 20, 30, 100 of meters of gains. But Ukraine is advancing. And for Ukrainian army, there is no task how to capture Bakhmut. They don't need to capture that quickly. They need to destroy as many Russians as possible. The Ukrainian army has another task to destroy as many troops and to capture as much Russian ammunition as possible. Therefore, the Ukrainians act under Bakhmut as carefully as possible, and the advancing is very slow, but it's going. And the Russians from the reserves who came there to stop the Ukrainian army are not allowed to gain a foothold. They are not allowed to dig in. The Ukrainian army is moving forward and grinding away new reserves of the Russian forces. Thus, a situation is created that when the Ukrainian troops do go on the no decisive offensive in the south, then at this moment the Russians will not have any troops left in the south, or will have much less troops left. And this is really the strategy of Ukrainian forces. They need to weaken some of the front lines in the south so they can break through. That is, here's such a rather interesting tactical idea. You can probably even call it a strategic idea. And now the Russian telegram channels are like, wow, it seems like we have been deceived. It seems that we have been abandoned. And this is what we do and how we do it. And we can't abandon Bakhmut. We can't retreat. Well, all Russians say that we need to retreat from Bakhmut, but we need to retreat to other, more profitable, more favorable frontiers. But for the one reason, or prestige, media, and PR, because of that, and because of the orders of the Putin, they will not. What they will not do, they will not do that because they need the victory, and this victory is Bakhmut. By the way, very recently, one of the Russian bloggers wrote it, wrote exactly the same story, which happened in the village Marinka. In other words, the Ukrainian troops are slowly beginning to push enemy in Marinka. In general, push where the Russians have almost no fortifications, but they cannot afford to retreat for the same reasons. And the same story is happening in Avdiivka, where the offensive The offensive of Russia's army has also been defeated, and the Ukrainian army goes into counteroffensive. And again, in a place where there's no fortifications, where the Russians have nothing to hide behind and nowhere to go. One of the Russian terrorists, Igor Girkin, who was actually responsible for Crimean annexations, said that Russia suffered simply gigantic, gigantic, gigantic huge losses, some kind of colossal losses, much greater than Ukrainian troops, and therefore, like very difficult to hold even these small towns such as Avdiivka. Evgeny Prigozhin, Wagner Group later said that the flanks of the Bakhmut Group are collapsing and that the Russian troops standing on the flanks allegedly north of and south of Bakhmut, and they keep on retreating, fleeing at some points. And this is true. And we know that from reports from the Ukrainian side and from reports from the Russian side. And as a result, this Ukrainian plan to grind a huge number of Russian troops in Donbass, even before the start of major offensive, really works. Another such moment is interesting that Prigozhin said that the Russian troops retreated from Klishivka village. Who doesn't know Klishivka is actually the village located under the hill, a very important position located on the top of the hill. From the top of the hill, you can see both Klishivka and Bakhmut. What I understood that now there's a very active battle for those positions over Klishivka, and the Russians are retreating there. When the Ukrainians will get this Klishivka village, it can be said that the operation of the further offensive in the Bakhmut area will be much easier for the Ukrainian army than it's now. That is, its positions will be much more convenient for the offensive. I don't fully understand all the situations or all the strategy of the military, but I see that the plan of the Ukrainian command turned out to be non-standard. Everyone was talking about the attack in the south, but they decided to act differently. And now it turns out that thanks to chosen algorithm of actions, the Russian army simply melts like a burning candle. It is simply burned completely in the Bakhmut area. When it burns out, then it will be useless to defend other positions along the front lines. Russia says it has fully captured the smashed eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, which would mark an end of the longest and bloodiest battle of the 15-month war. That's what claimed the private army group head Prigozhin. Prigozhin said that his mission has been completed. The assault on the largely leveled city was led by troops from the Wagner Group and with the leader Yevgeny Prigozhin said on Saturday that his troops had finally pushed the Ukrainians out of the last built up area inside of the city. Taking Bakhmut, which Russia refers to Soviet era name Artyomivsk, would represent Moscow's first big victory in the conflict in more than 10 months. As a result of offensive actions by Wagner assault units supported by artillery and aviation of the Southern Group of Forces, the liberation of the Bakhmut has been completed, the Russian Defense Ministry said in one line statement. At the same time, Kiev denied Prigozhin's claim early this Sunday, because this is not true. Heavy fighting in Bakhmut continues. The situation is critical, said Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malyar the same day. She said that Ukrainian troops were holding the defense in the city. And as of now, our defenders control certain industrial and infrastructure facilities in the area, she said. There was no immediate response from the Ukraine to the Russian Defense Ministry's statements. It was, as we know, it was not possible to verify either claim. Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated troops on capturing the city and said those who had distinguished themselves would be given awards, domestic Russian news agency reported. The claims came after a week in which Ukrainian forces have made their most rapid gains for 6 months on Bakhmut's northern and southern flanks. The head of Wagner, Prigozhin, who has repeatedly denounced Russia's regular military for abandoning group ground captured early by his men, said his own forces would pull out of Bakhmut in 5 days to rest, handing their ruins over to the regular Russian military. So, as Prigozhin said, today at 12 noon, Bakhmut was completely taken, saying that in a video message, which he appeared in combat fatigues in the front of line on fighters holding Russian flags and Wagner banner. We completely took the whole city from house to house, the Russian terrorist said. Ukrainian military spokesperson Serhiy Cherevati, reacting to Prigozhin's comments before Russia's announcement, had told had announced that this is not true. Our units are still fighting in Bakhmut. Whether the Ukrainian forces have left Bakhmut or not, they have been slowly pulling back inside in to clusters of buildings on the city's western edge. Meanwhile, to the north and south, they have sighted swathes of territory from Russian troops. Russia has acknowledged losing some ground around Bakhmut in the past week, while denying assertions by Prigozhin that the flanks around the city, guarded by regular troops, have collapsed. Kiev, at the same time, says its aim in Bakhmut has been to draw Russian forces from elsewhere on the front into the city, to inflict high casualties there and weaken Moscow's defensive line elsewhere ahead of planned major counteroffensive. The battle for Bakhmut has revealed a deepening spirit between Wagner and mercenary forces that has force that he's that has recruited thousands of convicts from Russian prisons and the regular Russian army. For 2 weeks, Prigozhin has been issuing daily video and audio messages denouncing Russia's military leadership, often in expletive laden runs. In Saturday's video, he said that because of the whims of Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, 5 times more guys died than they should have. He thanks Putin that he gave us this chance and great honor to defend our motherland. Moscow has long claimed that capturing Bakhmut would be a stepping stone towards advancing deeper into Donbass region. It claims to have annexed from Ukraine. It has made it a principal target of a massive offensive that failed to capture any significant ground elsewhere. Prigozhin has acknowledged that Bakhmut, formerly a city of 70,000 people, has little strategic significance, despite its huge symbolic importance because of the scale of losses in Europe's bloodiest ground battle since the Second World War. Saturday's claim came as Kiev prepared its counteroffensive, the next major phase in the war after 6 months during which it kept its forces in the defensive while weathering Russia's big offensive. President Volodymyr Zelensky, at the same time attending G7 summit of major industrial powers in Japan on Saturday, winning pledges of support, including a signal from Washington it would now back the training of Ukrainian pilots to fly F 16 warplanes. Previously, sending combat aircrafts had been a taboo. So Ukraine armed forces have missing the last piece. We have the weapons, we have the people, but we need a number of fighter jets, and the modern one, F 16. So a few days later, the US, Portugal, and Italy have joined the air coalition for Ukraine that has been started by some Western partners. During the press conference after the G7 summit in Japan, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, officially announced that the US military will train Ukrainian pilots to operate and work on F 16 fighter jets. During this training, which will last several months, the Air Coalition will decide when to provide planes, how many, and who will provide them. Ukraine's Ministry of Foreign Affairs reported that Portugal has joined the aviation coalition and is ready to train Ukrainian pilots and mechanics. At the same time, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said, after attending the G7 summit, that her country could join the air coalition after discussions with allies. Also, during a speech in Hiroshima, the head of the British government announced that Great Britain will begin training Ukrainian pilots on F 16 fighter jets starting this summer. The air forces of Ukraine believe that in the first stage, Ukraine can receive several dozen aircrafts from its partners. It will significantly help Ukraine counteroffensive to liberate its land. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, please share it with your friends.